My name is John Bernstein. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Technology in Education and Training, NCTET, and I am so thrilled to welcome you to the first in a series of events that we're going to be having in the next 2 days, culminating in our NCTET 2022 ball. Not to be confused with the NCTET 2021 ball for the inauguration, which was then moved to December of 2021. It is now here May of 2022. So it took us a while, but we got here. So, we couldn't be here if we didn't have the support of the folks who are in this room and I'm not kidding, 37 organizations and companies that have sponsored this event. That is a record for the ball. Sure, we had 2 to 3 years to gather those names, but I just want to say that we're thrilled that folks participated, sponsored us, and are showing up. We're going to have a great crowd tomorrow night. Well over 200 people are attending the first real in-person education event in this town in over 2 years. So we're really fortunate to have this. The other thing I want to note while we're here, by the way, NCTET is actually going to be sponsoring its 30th anniversary next year. Don't worry, I'm not raising money for that. But let me give you a little background for those of you who are unfamiliar with NCTET. We actually started as a way for the Clinton administration to bring together the education community, industry, and government to try to figure out what this thing, ed tech, was back in 1992. We're going to be honoring, in fact, John Cradler, who is with us today. John, you want to raise your hand? And John just terrified me by telling me that he has, going back, I think, to 1993, all of the stuff that we were putting together back then to flesh out what EdTech was, and this is before we even had an E-rate program. And in fact, one of the outgrowths of NCTET was EdLink and the folks who came together to put together the E-rate program. The folks that we were talking with in Vice President Gore's office at the time are the people who helped put that together, along with Senator Rockefeller, Senator Markey, Senator Snowe, and Senator Kerry. So NCTET has a very long and storied history, and apparently John Cradler has all the paper to prove it. So John and I will talk about a history about this sometime later. So NCTET, as you know, is a big organization. We used to talk about only having people from within town as part of NCTET. We now have 27 members, half of whom reside outside of the DC metropolitan area. So we are bad and we're nationwide, I guess, to quote the song. And we're really thrilled that we actually get those kinds of inputs into Washington, D.C. from our great folks that are out throughout the nation. And we're thrilled to have several of you here today, and we'll see many of you tomorrow night. Beyond our nationwide reach, NCTET's mission has also continued to evolve. We are not only about informing Washington about the value of technology in education, in the educational enterprise, but increasingly we're focused on furthering the conversation about how technology and connectivity continue to change education and the need for sound policy and financial support to ensure equitable access to technology and to connectivity. And we're going to hear a lot about that today, I believe. Today, in furtherance of these efforts, we are bringing together several terrific thought leaders to discuss where education can and should go after more than 2 years of grappling with this pandemic. I'm excited to hear what our panel and our keynote speaker have to say, and we're hoping that you're going to be involved in the conversation as well. There will be plenty of time for questions, and the good news, Kevin, this is not a shy group, I'm pretty sure. So this brings me to our opening speaker, and I'm thrilled to have her here, and I'm hoping to see her tomorrow night, despite the fact that I sent her the wrong date originally. Jessica Rosenworcel is really a longtime friend of the education community. I think many of you know her, have met her personally. She has visited your school, she has visited your states, she has received, I think, virtually every award that we have to give within our community. So we actually came up with a new one for her, honestly, and a couple other folks, because you have to continue to reward the people who are constantly delivering for you, and Jessica is one of those people. So let me give you a little bit of background on her, for those of you who don't know her as well as many of you do. It's been my privilege to work with her actually throughout the course, I think, of much of your public service career, including her stints in the U.S. Senate, where she worked for the aforementioned Senator Rockefeller, as well as Senator Daniel Inouye, the late Senator Daniel Inouye, on the Commerce Committee. She was a commissioner twice. And now, and we're so thrilled about this, is chair of the FCC. It's been a long time coming. And we are so thrilled that she is in that chair because we know that we can count on her there. So at each stop, Jessica has really proven herself to be a protector of the E-rate program and a promoter of it as well, but also someone who's a visionary about what technology and connectivity can do. She has really been working hard on this thing called the homework gap. It's a term that she coined, and coined it well, so that now we talk about it like we talk about Kleenex and Zoom, I guess. Sorry, Microsoft. Just kidding. Right now, the FCC under her leadership is putting the finishing touches on disseminating to schools and libraries the more than $7 billion that Congress appropriated to the Emergency Connectivity Fund to help close the homework gap. Now, everyone has seen the stories about how schools aren't spending their money. The American Rescue Plan K-12 money is still sitting around in bank accounts. Not this money. It's all gonna be probably out the door in a couple of days once this application process is over with. And we have her leadership of the FCC to thank for getting it done. So let's give one more cheer for the chair of the FCC, Jessica Rosenworcel.
Thank you so much, John. Those words are unreasonably kind. Appreciate it. Thank you all for having me. This coalition has always been about making digital connections, but boy, is it good to be somewhere in person. And for many of us, I know it's been far too long. So you asked me to tell a little bit about my personal journey as a policymaker working to promote digital learning and digital equity. Specifically, you asked to talk a little bit about the homework gap, how it became a signature issue for me, and of course, what we're going to do at the Federal Communications Commission to fix it. All right, we're going to start, though, by looking back. It was actually on this day, 10 years ago, that I was first sworn in as an FCC commissioner. Now, a lot has happened in the intervening decade. I was on the commission, I was off the commission, and now I'm serving as the agency's first confirmed chairwoman in its 87-year history. And yeah, it took a really long time for that to happen. I'm gonna make use of all my time. So back when I joined the agency, I wasn't exactly new to communications policy. I'd already had more than a decade of working on these issues, and a bunch of that time was spent working for the then chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, my boss, my friend, my mentor, Senator J. Rockefeller, one of the godfathers of the E-rate program. So here I was. I started at the commission. I was new in this role. I was trying to figure out how the computer system works. And I was trying to think about what issues I should work on where we could really make progress and press forward. And of course, that led me to E-rate. Because for more than 2 decades, E-rate has provided vital support to connect schools and libraries all across the country. It got its start in the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And many of you probably remember 1996. I know it's when I called the internet the information superhighway. Maybe you did too. But in terms of technology, right, it was a long time ago, and yet Congress saw something so clearly, because in 1996, they understood that we're going to need these connections in our schools to advance education. In fact, when the law was passed, only 14% of public schools were actually connected to this information superhighway. Today, more than 95% of our classrooms are connected, and we can thank E-rate for it. I think the program is an unstoppable success, but I also know this. Great programs do not thrive without continuous attention and care. And when I joined the agency, I quickly became convinced that E-rate needed a reboot. The budget was capped. It had failed to keep pace with inflation, and that meant billions was being left on the table for our schools and libraries. And plus the program and all of its rules had this kind of analog era quality. It's like stuck in the dial-up hiss and ding kind of stage. And as a result, we had all of these schools across the country subscribing to broadband at speeds that were not much higher than what the typical household was getting at the time. So one of the first things I did as a commissioner was put out a call to reboot and reinvigorate E-rate. I gave it a name, E-rate 2.0, and with the help of so many people in this room, we made E-rate 2.0 happen. The commission approved a major modernization that refocused the program on high-speed broadband, streamlined the application process, we can still do work on that, and increased the budget and indexed it to inflation. But that's not the end of the story, because of course something interesting happened along the way. To inform my thinking about E-rate, I kind of knew that I needed to get out of Washington and go on the road and visit schools all across the country to learn more. So here's what struck with me. No matter where I went, small towns, big cities, urban America, rural America, everything in between, I heard the same thing over and over and over again from educators. It kind of went like this. The E-rate program is great. We have these connections and we can now use them in education. But when our students go home at night, not all of them have reliable internet access at home. And it's getting increasingly hard for us as teachers to assign homework if we don't have the confidence that all of our students have access outside of school. So the more I talked to educators, the more I heard this story again and again and again. And by now, of course, all of these stories have become familiar to people in Washington, but at the time, no one was talking about them. And at the time, I was struck by something we now talk about a lot. I heard about kids sitting in the school parking lot with borrowed laptops late in the evening, pecking away just to do their homework in the only place where they could get the Wi-Fi signal they needed for school. I heard about kids sliding into the booth of fast food restaurants where they would do their homework with soda and a side of fries. And the thing is, when you hear those stories, they stay with you. They don't go away. They're hard to forget. So I took all these on-the-road learnings back to the office, where I was still figuring out the computer system, and I combed through all the data I could find. And there was one statistic that stood out. I found that at the time, 7 in 10 teachers were assigning homework that required internet access. But the FCC collects data too about broadband. And our data said 1 in 3 households does not subscribe. So where those numbers overlap is what I started calling the homework gap, because I felt like this part of the digital divide needed its own definition, its own phrase, its own call to arms so we could bring it attention, because that's how you fix things. So I kept on giving speeches about it, talking about it like it was the cruelest part of the digital divide, because it is. And the data at the time that we were able to collect said that there were 12 million students that fell into the homework gap. But then by early 2016, the New York Times actually ran a front page article on the homework gap, and it focused on this story of Isabella and Tony Ruiz of McAllen, Texas. It described how Isabella, who was 11, and her brother Tony, who was 12, and this one hits me harder now because my son's 12, and I can't even imagine. And every weeknight, they would stand on a patch of sidewalk across from the elementary school near their home. They took up residence there night after night in the dark to pick up a wireless signal they needed to do their homework. And they shared the cracked screen of their family smartphone. And using it, they'd download math materials and review whatever they needed to for class. So these are kids with grit in spades. And the thing is, after that article came out, the President of the United States shared Isabella and Tony's story on social media. And this brought attention to the homework gap like never before. This really matters because action follows awareness, and getting Washington to focus on the homework gap was an important first step. But of course, the next step I didn't see coming, and I bet neither did you, because everything changed with the pandemic. Classes moved online, and we went from having millions of students who couldn't do their nightly schoolwork to having millions of kids who couldn't get to school at all. Because children living in households without a reliable internet connection were locked out of the virtual classroom. The homework gap became a full-fledged education gap. And it turns out that the problem was bigger than we previously thought. There was this new study that found that the homework gap had grown during the pandemic to affect nearly 17 million kids nationwide. As a result, the cost of the homework gap had become too glaring to ignore. Somebody had to act, and Congress did, big time. Congress provided the FCC with the funds to create the nation's first ever program to help close the homework gap. It began last year, and as John mentioned earlier, it's called the Emergency Connectivity Fund. It's Washington, so we call it the ECF. And since September of 2021, the ECF has been helping schools and libraries get devices and broadband connections to students who would otherwise be stuck offline and left out of virtual learning. So just to give you a few examples, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, they've used ECF support to provide more than 1,200 Chromebooks, 9,000 laptops, and 1,500 broadband hotspots to their students. And the local superintendent said these tools are helping their students grow academically and thrive socially and emotionally in what we all understand is a difficult time. In Westerville, Ohio, they distributed 4,000 Chromebooks and 300 Wi-Fi hotspots to local middle schoolers thanks to the ECF. And a local administrator said that this program is going to increase students' in-home internet connectivity and provide the technology they need to meet their learning needs at home. In fact, we've already reached more than 12.5 million students with the ECF program. But there's more good we can do and more connections we can make. That's because we just opened a third application filing window to award roughly $1 billion in emergency connectivity fund support. And that window closes May 13th. Now, looking at past demand, this third application filing window will likely be the last opportunity for schools and libraries to request funding before the remaining ECF support that was appropriated by Congress is exhausted. So as the ECF draws down, that raises an obvious question. What's next in the FCC's push to close the homework gap? I've got a new proposal that I want to unveil today. For context on what we're doing, let me share a story back from a visit to Hatch, New Mexico that I made in my long ago pre-pandemic days. Hatch is a rural community. If the name sounds familiar to you, it's because it's actually well known for the chilies that are grown in its dusty, dry soil. And while I was there, I met a student at the high school named Jonah Madrid. He played for the football team. And Jonah explained to me that being an athlete in a rural community at a school was not easy. You had to play teams, and they were all far away. So when the school day ended, Jonah would pile on a bus with his teammates, and they would often travel just an hour and a half to go play a game. And when that game was over, they would pile back on that bus, probably very sweaty, with all of their equipment, and they'd travel an hour and a half back to their hometown. And after the game was over and they reached the high school parking lot, Jonah would actually sit in the school parking lot, lingering in the pitch black dark with this glowing computer in his lap, doing his homework, because that was the only place he had a reliable and consistent way to get online. So listening to Jonah, I couldn't help but think about how much better off he'd been if he could have been doing some of that online assignment and some of that work on his school bus ride home, rather than wait to get to the school parking lot late at night. And of course, the same could be true for so many other young people across this country, setting aside road trips for football games. There are more than 25 million children in the United States that take the bus to school every day. In rural areas, that ride is especially long. It can be an hour to school and an hour back home at the end of the day. And of course, it's good for young people to spend some time daydreaming, decompressing, talking to friends. But wouldn't it be nice if kids had that option of using this time to connect for homework? Especially because we know not all of them have that connection at home. Now, the good news is we have a workable, common sense solution. We can connect our school buses and make them Wi-Fi enabled. We can call it Wi-Fi on wheels. We know it works because we've seen it done. Years ago, I visited Coachella Valley, California, that local school district where they were able to procure a bunch of tablets for their students, and there was just this problem. Many of the students had no internet access at home in the trailer home communities where they lived, which were near the agricultural fields where their parents worked. It had the effect of making those tablets not all that useful for homework. Fairly expensive paperweights. And so the superintendent took note. This was a rural area where, again, the students rode the bus for a long time to get to school and come back again at the end of the day. So he came up with a plan. He just equipped their school buses with Wi-Fi routers, and he turned ride time into connected time for homework. And I visited Coachella, and what I saw there was amazing. Now, during the past year, we saw the same thing happen with FCC support. When we set up the ECF, we followed the law carefully, and we did our best to make sure that it was easy for schools and libraries to apply. But at a higher level, it really came down to this. Our criteria for proposals was actually kind of simple. Will it connect students in a cost-effective way? And we made clear to everyone applying that creativity was welcome. So a bunch of school districts requested funding to bring broadband and Wi-Fi to school buses. In fact, to date, the FCC has committed over $35 million to help schools do this. In Sand Spring, Oklahoma, for example, they equipped 40 buses with Wi-Fi kits, and according to the school's IT director, the benefits are really big. As she tells it, students can now complete assignments in transit every day, and especially during the long extracurricular trips they take, and it keeps kids safe and focused. Plus, the community in Sand Springs has made plans to park these buses overnight in neighborhoods where connectivity is lacking, so the kids living nearby get even more opportunity to complete their homework. I think what's worked for the Emergency Connectivity Fund could work for E-rate. In fact, I think now is the right time to do this as the ECF effort is drawing down. So today I'm announcing that I am proposing a plan to my colleagues to make Wi-Fi on school buses eligible for E-rate support. This is... We're going to need that help convincing them, but I do not believe this is a big leap to make. It's both consistent with the law and the history of the program. After all, for many years, E-rate actually supported the use of communications for school buses, like wireless phones for the bus drivers, when shepherding students to and from school. This is just a digital age upgrade. And in the end, this isn't just about helping students like Jonah who struggle with an internet connection at home. Every student who rides the bus and feels like they don't have enough time in the day to get their homework done while juggling activities, after-school jobs, and the demands our kids have today, well, they all stand to benefit. This idea actually has bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. A coalition led by Senator Ben Ray Lujan, Senator Lindsey Graham, and Representative Peter Welch have sponsored similar efforts. So I hope my FCC colleagues will join with me and make this common sense change to E-rate and take the next meaningful step to narrow the homework gap. All right, so I know I was asked to talk about my personal story today, and somehow when I wanted to tell you my experiences, I wound up telling the stories of people from Hatch, New Mexico, McAllen, Texas, and the Coachella Valley in California, and a bunch of other places. And some of these places I have had the privilege of being able to visit firsthand. Those visits always leave their mark. They've influenced my thinking and have left me more convinced than ever that closing the homework gap is within our reach. So let's do it. During the last decade, we have made amazing progress connecting students across the country. But I think we can do more to expand digital learning, address digital equity, and make sure no child is left offline. So that's my story. That's actually our story. And that's what working together, I hope we can achieve. Thank you.
So we broke news. How do we feel about Wi-Fi and buses? I think they like it. All right. Well, so we're going to move on, and we'll see if we can make some more news here with our panel. I'm going to bring up our panel now. We're really good to them. We actually make them bring their own chairs, apparently. So, but if you guys want to come on up and grab your chairs and some microphones, and I'm going to introduce you to Kevin Hogan. So for those of you who don't know Kevin, and he has been really ubiquitous in the ed tech space for a long time, Kevin has been writing and talking about the confluence of society and technology for 30 years, with his work appearing in many titles, both online and in print, including Forbes, Wired, Business 2.0, and MIT Tech Review magazines, to just name a few. Since 2003, he's focused specifically on education technology, first as executive editor at Scholastic Administrator magazine, and then as content director for Tech and Learning. He is currently editor-at-large for eSchool News, where he hosts the Innovations in Education podcast, and is the founder of the Hogan Report, which can be found on the Substack platform. So please join me in welcoming Kevin, and he will welcome our panel.
Thanks so much, John, and thanks for the folks at NCTET for allowing me to be part of this conversation. It's been 2 years in front of other folks, so take it easy on me, okay? It's a long way from the recording studio next to my laundry room, where I just interviewed probably close to 200, many of you who are in this room, to talk about what I'm sure we're all tired of talking about, but we need to talk about it within context, which is the pandemic. But more importantly, and the chairwoman's remarks were really inspired and amazing, thinking about all the sessions that we've gone to like this, thinking about the digital divide and talking about it in concept. We're now talking about things in reality. I know as someone in an administration, she talked about numbers, she talked about dollars, she talked about solutions. It wasn't just this pie in the sky thing. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of our panelists, and I have no worries about that today. With our precursor conversations, I think the toughest part of my job today will be to end the conversation. But as we begin, I think I'd like to each of you to kind of give us a short introduction, but within a cocktail party sort of icebreaker. Does everybody remember cocktail parties? No. Or icebreakers? I think I'd like to hear a little bit about your aha moment back in 2020. And then we'll leave that there and then look towards the future. But what was the day? For me, it was Friday the 13th, 2020. At Tech and Learning, we were about to fly in about 50 superintendents and tech directors from around the country. I kind of look back and think, wow, we could have had the greatest super spreader in the country at that point. But we didn't. Knocked it down and knocked all subsequent events off. And it was that was when the brain kind of exploded. And I know for all the educators that I've spoken with, it was around that time, Black Friday, even in like that afternoon, where everything changed. So if we can hear a little bit about where that was, but then more importantly, where are you now? And where, as we start off this conversation, do you see the state of play? So Greg, maybe we'll start with you, please.
All right. Well,
I think you have to flip it on.
Well, first off, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. Today, I'm the superintendent of Alexandria City Public Schools, so you can imagine what our day was like. I have to say that, and I'm happy that our chief of technology is here. Our chief technology officer, Dr. Elizabeth Hoover, is in attendance, because we were looking at each other in disbelief, like, what in the heck are we going to do? But I still recall Dr. Hoover saying, we got this, early on. We were very fortunate to have a one-to-one, or to begin our one-to-one student technology kind of initiative in 2004. So this was before anybody was thinking about technology. And I say hats off to Rebecca Perry, who was the superintendent at that time. We took a lot of heat for wanting to spend $1 million on technology for students. But that made our lives so much easier. I also can think of, in that moment, we were supposed to close before Friday the 13th, because everyone around us was closing on Wednesday and Thursday. Dr. Hoover and I, we were like, she told me, she said, if you can give us till Friday, I promise you, we'll have our technology devices, people can take them home, and we will be set. And I was like, they're gonna kill me if I don't close school. Everybody else is closing school. We gotta close. And I had the courage and boldness to not close. And thank God we did not, because majority of our students were able to get their laptops that day. And all students who did not have them, over the next couple of months, we were able to get them to them. And not only were we able to get the laptops, but also Khajiits to provide them with wireless internet. So you told me to fast forward to today, or is that it?
Yep. No, fast forward.
So fast forward to today.
You saw the digital divide.
That's right. I mean, it was a digital divide the moment that, you know, we were in this, because we had families who now had these devices, which that was great. So we were like, perfect, you got the device, but you have no internet service, right? So then we had to come through with planning on how are we going to give them access to our internet. And Khajiits, we already had them in place, because that was something we were already doing for our families who requested them previously. But then we also we were innovative with our bus. You know, we put a wireless internet server on our bus out in one of our communities, Casa Chirilagua, where it's our Hispanic community that did not have a lot of the internet services. And we were able to put the bus out there with these servers, wireless servers, to provide them with internet access. So I just have to say that, you know, in Alexandria, I'm thankful, you know, not only to our IT team, but to the former superintendent, who was so forward-thinking in 2004, that we were fortunate to begin to narrow the homework gap early on, and we continue to do that throughout today.
Hello, my name is Cindy Sholtys-Cromwell, and I'm actually from Southwest Washington State. I am the national, yes, go Washington. I'm the National Digital Principal of the Year. So thank you, thank you. For us, it was kind of for me November 12th. So being from Washington State, we were kind of that hotbed, you know, north of us in Seattle was the first case. And we, like everything, we start hearing rumors. So March 12th, my daughter, I'm at Kelso High School, watching her on her French horn performing. And I thought, they're talking about this shortage stuff of toilet paper and hand sanitizer. I'm just gonna swing into Target. I live in Kelso, it's perfectly fine. And I walked in and people were freaking out. There was no toilet paper left. And that's for me like, this is hitting Kelso. Because most of the time, you know, in small cities, we just kind of get glanced over. So the next day is a professional development day for my staff. There's no students there. And we're talking, I had one of the best professional developments planned for that afternoon on how they were going to be able to engage with their students. And then we get this email. Everybody's watching the government. We're going to have a big news brief. So we all get in Mrs. Meeker's classroom, and we're watching it, and one of my teachers said, oh my goodness, I think this is something big, Cindy. What's gonna happen? And again, we'd heard rumors, like everybody else. And then they said, school shut down. And we looked around, our student stuff was still in our classroom. Oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And then the teachers start asking, do I get to take my stuff home? What is this going to look like? As a school, we thought, maybe it's just an extended spring break. Right, we're gonna get this figured out. We're all gonna be fine. Okay, right, 2 weeks, we'll be okay. Oh, you know, and people were, so does that mean we're gonna go to school till July now? I'm like, I don't know, this wasn't in principal preparation program. So that was my 13th year as a principal at an elementary school. And again, the teachers were saying, all of our stuff is here, the leftover lunches. We weren't a one-to-one. Like, we were a hot mess. We were like, what do we do? How do you teach kids if you can't see them? What about this student that I know is hurting? And how are we going to feed these kids? They rely on us. They count on us. So for us, we just gathered around and started to really dial it in. But I'll be honest, we were in denial until probably August. We kept thinking, oh, the school year's gonna start, right? It'll be fine. We're gonna have this. No, we weren't. So my journey, though, in June of that year, I became the principal of Kelso Virtual Academy, which is where I'm at now. 22nd year as an administrator. We had an online program already, but it was only 9th through 12th grade. And we only had 25 students every year. So we wanted to provide options for our families. My superintendent said, hey, Cindy, I think this could be big. I think that parents are going to look for options because that's part of our job, give families options. So our program grew from 25 students to 9th through 12th. We expanded kindergarten through 12th grade. That was a whole journey that summer. But we blew up to over 1,000 students that first day of school. Right before we had one teacher, I suddenly had 60 teachers that I couldn't meet with to show them this is how we do business. And some of them found out the day before. Surprise, you're working with Cindy at KVA. That was always good, right? So now let's fast forward for a minute. We are now a one-on-one district. We problem solved. How do we give our kids access to those devices? But as we just heard, those devices are great paperweights if you don't have internet. So now we've morphed. We are still a K-12 program, but one of the beauties that we provide for our families is the ability, if they want to be totally online in our program, and it's available 24 hours, 7 days a week for a flexible schedule, we can do that. If you want to be in brick and mortar, that's fine too. Or we have a hybrid model that works amazing for our families also, where they can take some classes through KVA, and then those classes that maybe would be difficult to do currently online, I think welding, my daughter's a welder, music, you can report to your brick and mortar and take those classes. Or if it's a class that you struggle with like math, you can take that in brick and mortar also. And then we've expanded, so now instead of just Kelso kids, if you have a zip code in the state of Washington, you can now attend Kelso Virtual Academy. We've expanded because we're doing amazing. We're not such a hot mess anymore. Took us a while, but we got it. So that's my story.
Well, Kristina, talk a little bit about from your perspective. I'm sure you were just walking out of a how to plan for a pandemic meeting when you had
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kristina Ishmael. I'm the acting director of the Office of Ed Tech. My pronouns are she and her, and I apologize, I'm getting over something, so I am going to keep my mask on, but I will make sure that the microphone is close to my mouth. In 2020, I was at New America, which is actually a couple blocks from here, right around the corner from the White House, and working on the Ed Policy program on their teaching, learning, and tech team. And of course, we did not see this coming. No one did. I attended EduCon, which is at Science Leadership Academy, that last weekend of January. And I remember sitting there with Chris Lehman, the principal, and Diana Laufenberg, who had previously worked there at Science Leadership Academy and leads inquiry schools now. And Diana had been following everything and was not trying to scare us, but was like, this is big. Like, we should be paying attention right now. Kristina, what are you all talking about in New America? What are you thinking about? Like, what does that look like from a policy perspective? And I was like, I have no idea. We weren't talking about it. And then, of course, I did bring it back, and people were like, oh, I don't know. We were signed home on March 11th. We were asked to take all of our belongings home at that time. The office was going to close down for a minimum of 4 weeks, and that's where we were. So we were not on the 2-week spring break by any means. But it was a quick pivot, and I knew right away. I was contacting friends that I used to teach with in Omaha, and it wasn't just on the coast at that point either. It was like, okay, we're going to talk to folks kind of in the middle of the country as well and see if they're hearing the same things. So that's where I was, and then a few things have happened. Of course, I was actually anticipating leaving for a year, working with ministries of education in 12 different countries. That was all canceled by that first part of April. Working on them with curriculum and open educational resources. My whole life, quite literally, shifted, much like all of ours, of course. And I am very grateful for my health and safety, as I'm sure all of you are as well. And in that process, I was part of the Biden-Harris transition team. And then I got to come back into this administration. And now I serve as the director of the Office of Ed Tech, which is an office that I previously served in towards the end of the Obama administration, running a project all around open educational resources called Go Open, which I know some of you are very familiar with. And we are a small and mighty team. We are 6 people strong. And we set the national policy and vision for ed tech. and it's a massive, massive charge. There are many things that keep me up at night. One of them is coming back into classrooms as we were really focusing on reopening and recovery, is we have all these devices, we have these hotspots. How are we going to continue to use them? How are we going to leverage technology in our classrooms now? How are we changing instructional practice? And that is still something that keeps me up at night, because I know that some of that technology has already gone back in the closet, and that can't happen. So we have to be prepared for the current world in which we sit and best prepare our learners. So that's where we are now.
Great, thank you. And really it is another example of how we just continue to go through what I call this greatest beta test in education history, right? I mean, a lot of these technologies were there, maybe not being implemented. Both Cindy, you and Greg sound like you were in districts where you were pretty progressive when it came to the use of those technologies. Let me ask both of you, what were some of the innovations that you discovered along the way that you intend to keep going forward?
So I think it's awesome that when we meet with our families, we don't have to have them in person. We can do that via Zoom. We can do it through a variety of different means. It's important for families to be able to work. And it's important that we don't impose upon them. But we also want to make sure that they're a part of their child's education. So being able to have a quick Zoom meeting, we will absolutely continue. One of the other things that came to fruition in this that I'm really excited about is, as much as I love meeting people in person, and that's something that we miss, I think it's something that I know we all took for granted, was the ability to walk down the hall and see our colleagues, to meet face-to-face with families, to be able to still do that via Zoom is also important, but to make sure we don't take that for granted. But one of the other pieces is when we do professional development within our organization, we don't have to travel. I'm thrilled that I traveled here from Washington State, let me be clear. This is fun. It's fun. But to be able to have the experts, to hear the researchers, to learn from others, from our own classrooms, is such a gift. It saves money. Instead of doing a trainer of a trainer of a trainer of a trainer model, which is what some of our districts have to do to get the information, to be able to continue that. Learning that every signature doesn't have to be in person, right? Having that technology where a family can sign off on an IEP or an important document is also something that we will continue. We've learned a variety of different ways to engage with our families, to keep them involved, and also thinking outside the box. One of the things we do at KVA that I love is, not only do I have the most amazing staff in the entire world, but we are constantly, what can we do, what can we do? And so meeting the needs of our families, so we offer evening hours. It's called a KVA Evening Cafe. That's when we can call parents. That's when we can reach our students that are working, and again, not impose on them. We have many families, they cannot get interrupted during the day. That's jeopardizing their livelihood, and we have to honor that. So it's not for us to demand and say, you have to confine and work with our program. We have to adjust our work to meet the needs of the parents and the families and the students we serve. And we'll continue to do that. Those are kind of my biggies.
Yeah, that's great, Doctor.
In addition to just engaging families, we've been able to engage our community as well. We literally changed 2 names of our schools during the pandemic when we were all 100% virtual. And one of them being a very serious situation because everybody knows about T.C. Williams. If you haven't seen the movie Remember the Titans, well, T.C. stands for Thomas Chambliss Williams, who was a segregationist in our community. He was the superintendent for 30 years and didn't believe black and white children should be under the same roof. Because of the pandemic, we were able to engage more families and really engage our community around who he was and what he stood for, and we allowed our students to lead that. And that was a huge aha moment, for us. We also have realized that some students actually do well virtually, right? That was something that many families were fearful of in the past because it seemed so foreign to folks. And it seemed like it was only something for gifted kids to do or advanced students and that type of thing. But now we're seeing that there are many students who are engaged and actually can learn online, and some staff members who can teach very well, and I'm not one of them who can teach very well online, but there are some who can, and that is an aha moment that we're continuing today. It is now a part of our program of studies to sign up for virtual classes. There are some guidelines that you're required to meet because everybody can't do virtual just because you want to, but we are providing this as a learning modality for our students moving forward. And we have to reimagine education and not go back to how things used to be. And I'm adamant about that within our school system because we didn't get it right before the pandemic. So let's learn from that and let's not go back to the same.
Yeah, Kristina, so again, two very progressive, tech-savvy districts here. You have responsibility over 15,000 school districts, which I know there are some.
No big deal. It's fine. That doesn't keep me up at night. No.
No pressure, no pressure. Here's a real good softball question for you, too. What do we do with the districts who maybe aren't in the same place with the same privileges and with the same leadership as these two districts?
Yeah.
Here?
So what I find really interesting is that we have all had to force ourselves in this position now, given the pandemic. Whether folks were already thinking of this or not, we had to get access to devices. We had to get access to connectivity, whether it were hotspots or whatever the case may be, through the Affordable Connectivity Program. So we've now all had that experience. We did our very best to provide continuity of learning. And for some folks, that was providing packets at the beginning. And that is a very viable option. But that is exactly how we provided that. So now that we've got the devices and we've got the technology, we've got the connectivity out there, everyone is at a certain kind of level, whether or not you were an early adopter of technology or not, you are at that level. So something that Richard Collada from ISTE mentioned at the CETA Leadership Summit back in November said, we're all at that same level now. Where do we go from here? And it's building up the skill set and making sure that we continue to empower not only our educators to continue to develop their own professional learning, to understand practice and pedagogy when they are doing things online, but it's also to empower our educational leaders to make sure that they are continuing to fund these things. This is a big question right now. I know that the most commonly visited website link that we have on the Office of Ed Tech is that Dear Colleague letter from 2017 that says, how do we fund Ed Tech? We are working on an update on this right now because this is incredibly important for us to think about. Once we spend those relief dollars, which we are doing, how do we sustain? And it's really hard to convince a foundation or philanthropy or anything like that when it's a sustainability project. When it's not novel, when it's not new, when it's not sexy, how are we going to sustain it? And so we have to make sure that we're thinking of all of our funding sources, whether it's Title I, II, III, IV-A, whether it's IDEA, all of these things are incredibly important. And so it's the empowerment and making sure that folks are still a part of the conversation, and then also thinking about that sustainability within the funding structures.
I wanted to add something to that
Yeah.
because I think that it's really important for us, especially in our rural areas who do not have the broadband
Yep.
access or the infrastructure
Right.
to really have internet services, that we start speaking on behalf of them too.
Thank you.
And I say that to our colleagues who are extremely privileged.
Yep.
Right now, granted, Alexandria is probably one of the richest cities in the country. What people don't realize is that our school system is 62% free and reduced lunch.
Yep.
And people are always shocked by that. And it's 70% black and brown students in Alexandria City Public Schools. Even though our city is predominantly white, our schools, very different story to tell. But I tell our colleagues quite often, my superintendent colleagues, that we need to make sure we're speaking on behalf of those who just don't have the loudest voice.
Yep.
And who don't have a seat at the table, because this technology component is becoming not only a homework gap, but it's becoming a huge divide amongst our country. And it is an inequity that if we don't fix now, it is going to be detrimental for generations to come. So it is that important that we have to make sure we're speaking up for all school systems that are out there. And I believe that the folks who have the most privilege need to make sure they have the loudest voice, because
you.
their voices will get heard before our rural brothers and sisters.
And thank you. Thank you for saying that. When I was at the state level in Nebraska, 245 public schools, it's one of 7 states that don't allow charters. and they have incredible amount of rural schools. And that is, whenever I think of equity, that's what I default to. Not necessarily urban centers by any means, but I'm also looking at my LA Unified folks here too. And we know that there's digital redlining as well, where there's just these empty pockets. So it's an and situation, and you know that as well. But it is making sure that rural is represented. It's making sure that we have our urban areas that are redlined, that they're represented, and any of the traditionally or historically underserved populations. So thank you.
And I'd like to just take this moment to remind the audience that if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. The acoustics in here are great. I don't think you'll even need a mic. Just use your teacher voice, as I'm sure you all have, to add to the conversation, because I think that that's really important. At this point, I like to break it down into some nitty-gritties here, some old-fashioned education acronyms that, again, we used to talk about in theory, squishy, that have become reality, just like the chairwoman said, starting with PD, professional development, and what the future of that looks like. Again, BP, before the pandemic, it was something I think that's very different than what it is now. Doctor, maybe you can start and talk about where you see the use of these technologies. Well, I guess my first question is, do I ever have to write an article again trying to convince teachers that technology should be in the classroom?
Very few people right now don't want technology in the classroom, but there's still some out there. I'm gonna be honest with you, there's still some out there. And it's not necessarily they don't want technology in the classroom, is that they don't want to relearn how to teach or relearn how to engage students, right? Because it is difficult. And I say it as it was a challenge for me as I was a professor at Howard University. And in the fall, I was teaching this class virtually. I am a people person. I get energy from people, right? So I'm sitting on this Zoom like, first off, look at my face. This doesn't look good right now. While somebody's talking, look at my facial expression. Oh my God, I didn't know I made that face while somebody was talking.
You're laying in bed with your
yeah, I'm just like, this. I wish I'd have known that I looked like this all along. But, so I was distracted. But I had to find ways for my own engagement. And I knew music was one thing that got me kind of like upbeat, pumped up. So I always started my class with music, right? So I had to step into my discomfort or lean into my discomfort. And I think that is what we're going to have to do with our educators right now. I also think that this is a huge opportunity when we're talking about professional learning and technology, because we can do so many things and reach so many people on Zoom, right? And we could not do that before, right? We could not say, hey, and then it's also recorded. So we can record it and you can go back and watch it, or you can just fast forward to the part that you want to see, right? It's just up to you. And I think that these are things that's changing the game for the professional learning. But I do think we're going to have to help teachers as well as staff members and leaders just know how to use the technology most effectively and how to kind of reimagine what engagement looks like, because online learning is very different than in-person learning, and we can't replicate in-person on a computer. But I do know that we can enhance the experience that we know of online. I think it can be even better than it currently is from the lessons that we've learned over the past 2 years.
And so maybe it is just semantics, Cindy, but just by calling it professional learning instead of professional development might make a change for teacher behavior. I mean, so
Yes.
The technology's there. They've been using it for their own students, and maybe they can use it for their own professional learning.
And I was going to say, professional learning is why we call it professional learning. Instead of professional development, we no longer use that term, because when you say professional development, it makes it sound like you have a deficit or something's wrong with you,
Right.
Whereas we are lifelong learners, so we're now engaging in professional learning, and you're more receptive to being engaged and wanting to, be a part of that learning experience.
I love that term. Just to add, that was one of the beautiful things that came out of all of this. Some of our novice teachers, for example, became the mentors for some of our more seasoned, experienced teachers who were afraid of, what do I click, or what do I what do I do on this? That was one of the beauties that came out of it. Our focus for professional learning, I'm going to steal that, love that, currently has been that social emotional learning. We know it's a huge concern. Our students, going back to Maslow's hierarchy, if students aren't feeling safe, if they're not feeling like they belong, they're not feeling like they have a purpose, we can never get to those core academic standards that we're responsible for making sure that they meet. So we're doing a lot of work around that. It's critical, and I think teachers are absolutely open to always improving and becoming their best self. One of the things I want to say, as a virtual principal, that engagement, when I did whole class kindergarten Zooms, that was rough, to keep them engaged. But it was so much fun, and I know I became better. But virtual learning is absolutely here to stay. But we have to make sure that the technology does not replace the teacher, right? Because teachers, they love their students. They care, that human interaction, being able to support. Technology is lovely, and it's going to help us take learning to that next level, but it can never replace that teacher relationship with students.
Is that resonating, Kristina?
I'm snapping, yes. One of my colleagues at the Nebraska Department of Education, Tricia Parker, once said, "We don't take kids to a pencil lab. Why would we take them to a computer lab?" Yeah. And that has resonated with me for years. And that is exactly how, I am the director of the Office of Ed Tech, and I will always say technology is a tool. Yep. And it is not it's not there to replace those teachers. Those relationships matter. And I'm really happy to hear you talk about the emphasis on social emotional learning. The Department of Education put out a report back in October now around social emotional and mental health, and what are the ways that we can support our students using various funding streams to do that. It's something that we're talking about as well. It was called out in the State of the Union. And then I got a phone call the next day from the White House going, "Hi, what are you doing in your office about this?" I was like, ugh. But we're talking about it. What are some of the tools that we're using? Are we using telehealth? How do we think about ed tech in these purposes? And we're still having those conversations. We actually have a cross-agency working group now that is focusing on mental health. And it is a passion area of my own. And so I'm like, yep, I'll be there. I will move things in my calendar so that I can be there. Because it's incredibly important. And it's something that I talk about very openly and transparently on social media as well. I shared yesterday, and I had folks reaching out. Yesterday was a really rough day for me. And I had people literally call me. And it was that matters. And we need that for our learners as well. So that's incredibly important.
And that's a good segue into another seismic shift that I've noticed in my conversations the past 2 years. And as a parent, is the newly involved aspects of parents in connection with their teachers. Myself, I spoke more to my kids' teachers in the past 18 months than I had in 18 years previously, out of necessity, right, at first. But then it became something that was, it was a benefit. Cindy, talk a little bit. I know you have a hybrid model that is insistent upon the use of coaches being at home with the students when you're going back and forth. How important is that? Expound upon that. Was it there before the pandemic, or do you have it there afterwards? And what sort of advice would you give to districts who are attempting a future truly hybrid model, not just a virtual academy?
Thank you for that question. So when we expanded Kelso Virtual from 9th through 12th and we moved down to kindergarten through 5th, it was critical that our students, K through 5, have what we call learning coaches. And that's the adult that sits by them side by side as they're going through their online curriculum. We also wanted to make sure that we included, just as a side note, pen and paper, right? Because this reading is really, that'll work. But there's something different, especially with the littles, when they take their hand and they are writing. But that requires another adult to be side by side to ensure that they're doing their work, that it's not, someone else. One of the frustrations has been is not all of our students have that adult that can be there. So our program is open, again, I think I've said this earlier, 24 hours, 7 days a week. So if that adult that is taking that responsibility for Monday, maybe it's a different adult on Tuesday, we can adjust their work schedule, their school work schedule to support that. So students can be at home, get the core classes or any classes they choose from us, and then they can go to the brick and mortar class and maybe participate in PE, music classes. Maybe they're a student that's really engaged with science. Maybe they're a special needs student and they need to report to the brick and mortar to be able to get some additional one-on-one supports. So we're able to do that. But again, you have to have that learning coach, that side by side. And it's not the entire time, but definitely to monitor to make sure that they're on track, making sure that they understand. And many times we've found that it's the littles that are teaching the adults how to use the technology. So.
Yeah, and Doctor, has there been a change in the relationship with parents since the pandemic and the use of these technologies, and how do you see improving upon that going forward?
You know, and I think you touched on this earlier with having kind of our parent-teacher conferences. We have seen more engagement with that. And then we also have seen, you know, some parents, they have different attitudes now with this pandemic, and they're not sending nice messages sometimes. And I'm like, you weren't used to send that before. Like, what's going on? And you feel so empowered with this, with some of the emails and things that you all send. But I also know that they've been trapped in their homes for 2 years with their children, the same way I have been. So people are a little frustrated, so I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. But I do think that with our parent-teacher conferences and having parents a part of like our PTA meetings and things of that nature, it really has been a game changer. This year, our PTA, they even said that they wanted to continue to remain virtual because now, before we were trying to provide like childcare services and food and those types of things to try to keep people engaged. But because they're still home and able to chime in, turn their cameras off if there are things they need to do, and still listen to what's happening in that meeting, I see that a lot of our families, they're just more engaged. We see families who just were not a part of some of these meetings in the past. So that's been a huge celebration, I think, for us.
And Kristina, talk a little bit from your perspective.
So we, the Office of Ed Tech started a new project called the Digital Equity Education Roundtables, because we like acronyms, it's DEAR. And this is, so as you all know, the bipartisan infrastructure law was signed by the president back in November, which allocated $65 billion to the Department of Commerce through NTIA in 4 different areas. Sorry, I have to get really deep here. In 4 different areas, really that we can work on connectivity. That's the whole point, okay? So yes, exactly. One of the ways that the Department of Ed is engaging with NTIA and with the Department of Commerce is the state digital equity plans that will soon be available to states nearest you. These funds will go through your governor's office, and right now, education is not included. And so this is really significant for us to lift up in our office to say, okay, we need districts, we need states, we need everyone to be at the table. And so we identified 5 different groups that are historically underrepresented and underserved. Students of color, tribal students, making sure that we have rural students, our urban students, and then our adult learners as well, and those that are incarcerated and have very, very limited access to begin with, and making sure that we serve all of these learners. And what are the barriers that prevent them from adopting some sort of connectivity, whether it's the emergency funds that were mentioned by the chairwoman earlier, or how they continue now. All of that to say, we're working on guidance that will be published this fall that will be put out to kind of help states think about their digital equity plans. And that's important in all of this work because, of course, we need educators to be a part of the conversation. And that is also an opportunity for us to engage with the folks that are furthest from digital equity right now. A couple of weeks ago, we had one of these listening sessions on a Saturday, and we heard from families and caregivers that were not your traditional folks. They were grandparents. And we've been really cognizant of the fact that we don't always just say parents, but we want to say caregivers as well. Because it doesn't just default to our parents. Yes, of course, that is the majority. But these grandparent stories that they were sharing with us, they were like, I'm taking care of 4 of my grandchildren. This was in rural Texas. This woman self-identified that she was 67 years old and said, I didn't know how to turn on a computer. And then all of a sudden, my 4 grandkids were sent home with these devices, and I didn't know what to do. So we're also thinking about how we take care of our families and caregivers and the communities as part of this. It's not just exclusive to the families that are in those houses, but it's the communities as well. So we want to leverage the communication tools and the ed tech tools that have kept us in constant kind of communication and connection, but we also have to make sure that we're not just sticking with that one kind of household. Yep. We're also serving the whole community.
Last call for questions.
Hey, so I know that one of the challenges that states and districts are facing right now is teacher retention, educator retention, really, right? Because it's not just teachers, principals, superintendents, and so on. I'm curious about the potential, whether you've seen it, used it, how can technology play a role in teacher retention, educator retention, and what are you seeing? What are the things that are actually the attractors?
So we're seeing a retention problem too right now. What we're doing is we're trying to be innovative with even just the teacher role or just an educator's role. Some of our jobs that we're able to still be virtual in Alexandria City Public Schools, they still currently are. And that's a huge incentive for us because and this is particularly with a lot of our central office jobs and positions, but even when we're doing IEP meetings and things, they can now be done via Zoom, so you don't actually have to be in person. We have converted our professional learning to being more hybrid and sometimes completely virtual. So then families, or sorry, not families, but staff, they can be at home when they are engaging in our professional learning activities, so you don't have to come into the school if you don't need to. And also teacher work days, they're now being virtual. So these are just some of the things that we're utilizing as much as we can just to give a little more flexibility to our staff. I'm not seeing a lot of our neighboring school divisions promoting that as much as we are, and I think that's why we see our retention rates. Believe it or not, our retention rates right now are higher than they were prior to the pandemic in Alexandria. And I think the reasoning for that is because we really treated our staff like professionals during the pandemic. I was adamant around not telling people if you don't come back, you're going to be fired and things of that nature, which many school divisions across this country have done, and shaming, teachers. I would always say, we're honored to be called first responders, but we're not. So, thank you for honoring us, but we're not first responders. We're not in the hospital. We're in a school, and there really is no comparison. And the fact that we had to have empathy because our staff, they were going through the same challenges that our families were. And we needed to be a little empathetic around that. So I think that's why we've been able to retain our staff over the years. But just being more innovative with the virtual learning options for staff has been helpful with our retention.
Okay. It's like a game show. Everybody has their masks on. I think so. Oh, now I know who it is. I'm going to set the egg timer, Cheryl.
So one of the things that has plagued me for a million years is the fact we didn't have funding. So, we crawled to DC, some of us have the scars on our legs still from calling and begging for money. So we got the funding. It was the pot of gold at the end of the technology rainbow. But what I'm hearing from districts around the country is there was an infusion of technology so massive that so many people said they weren't prepared to deal with it adequately and competently. So what happened is a lot of versions of the wild, wild west of technology that, school principals, my heart's with you because I was a school principal for many years before I was a CTO, that they were like, the teacher wanted something, okay, let's buy it. I need this, let's buy that, So the digital piece has kind of been spread all over the map. And all of us, that have been doing this a long time know that data helps drive and inform instructional progress. So with this wide variety of digital resources, of this one doing this, no real time to standardize and vet, that as we move forward. How can we, as practitioners, really use the infrastructure, the other tools that we have to manage the technology to make sure that we don't have this backlash that we're seeing from some parents about some very good things they think are bad, and make sure that we do not lose our momentum or our structure or our focus on really improving instructional progress with tools of all of the centuries going forward. I didn't mean that to be wrong.
Yeah, who wants that softball?
What a great question. Thank you. Because you're so accurate. We had this money and we need to buy stuff with it. And what stuff do you buy? And my email was blowing up with, hey, Cindy, you need this, and you need this, and you need this. And hey, by the way, get this too, and we'll throw in an extra one. And there weren't reviews, right? There weren't reviews. So you didn't know if you were getting something that was going to last longer than my dishwasher or not. Absolutely accurate. One of the things we're doing is we're purchasing things because I also believe that sometimes reviews on Amazon or on the internet, because I, want to be a good consumer with funds, aren't always accurate. My go-to is I will ask, who's using it? Who's using it? And I don't want it to be in a lab. I want to talk to somebody who's actually hands-on with kids or in the same situation I am before I purchase it. And if you did it in a lab with only, third graders that are all high achieving, I want to know did it work for the other kids? So we as consumers, whether it's for my home or my school, I'm going to be making phone calls. And there's so many new products coming out. We want to, again, make sure that we're providing for all of our students. Is it going to work with our software? Is it going to work with the devices we have? Because that was a learning too, right? There were so many promises as we were expanding our virtual school. Programmers, oh, Cindy, absolutely. It's going to talk to your student database. It didn't. It didn't. And the demos that we received didn't always match the actual product. So it's very important for us, just like when we were purchasing things for our home, you have to have the conversations and talk to the people and see it and not do a knee-jerk reaction because that's the latest and greatest. We have to. We have to. So much more that I would like to talk to, but I'm getting the time here.
Yeah,
So.
we're getting a little tight here. One more question
Thank you.
grab from the crowd. I think that's Sean.
My question is really, safety and security. One of the greatest things we have right now is provide ways that our kids are safe, whether they're learning in person or they're virtual. As a former CTO, my concern relates into cybersecurity. So I guess my concern, and I'll put this to you, Kristina, is how do we then develop ways to then build in best practices that can help districts who are at the most vulnerable? The latest COSID survey says cybersecurity is the #1 concern. It's great we have all digital equity, we have different ways of curriculum, but if we don't provide a way to ensure that it's safe and secure for our kids or our teachers, to add on to Cheryl's point, it's just going to inflame largely the community. So where does that play into your perspective to then help ensure that what we're doing is provided so there are effective resources and let the community know, there may be a cost, but it's a cost that's got to be shared because it's going to be integral into making sure that we are, again, providing what's safe and secure for our kids.
The main document that you may know comes out of our office is the National Ed Tech Plan. The current version is the 2017 version. We will be making an announcement maybe shortly, I don't know, about the RFP coming out to find someone that can help us with the refresh. And if you are familiar with the document, you know that there are 5 domains, and it's learning, teaching, leadership, assessment, and infrastructure. And of course, infrastructure being a part of, or cybersecurity being a part of our infrastructure. That is also one of our office priorities now. There is a posting, in case anyone wants a job, there's a posting right now for a fellowship within my office to focus on infrastructure, and cybersecurity plays a huge part of that right now. because of the increased, awareness, first of all, and the increased challenges that K-12 schools are facing, whether it was through ransomware or any of these types of attacks or breaches, and the GAO report that came out back in the fall, as well as the K-12 Cybersecurity Act of 2021 that we are working with CISA right now on the recommendations in the toolkit that they will be putting out hopefully this year, fingers crossed. So this is very much on our radar, and I was talking with Roberto Rodriguez last week, our assistant secretary, who I directly report to, and I got to substitute for today, so happy to be here. But he was at the Domestic Policy Council under Cecilia Munoz in the Obama administration. And one day he was sitting in a meeting with the president, as well as Secretary Duncan, and at the time, Deputy Secretary King. And President Obama said, "What is the one thing that keeps you up at night?" And both Arnie and John said cybersecurity. And this was back in 2009. And this was nowhere on Roberto's radar at all in leading education at the Domestic Policy Council at the White House. And so he mentioned this to me last week because we have this like kind of ad hoc working group right now at the department that I am leading, with folks from the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Office of Safe and Secure Schools, FSA, our higher ed folks, because they also have to worry about this too. It's not exclusive to K-12, as we know. And he goes, "So I think we should probably give it a little more thought." And that's exactly what we're doing. So I can tell you all that we are actively working on this. We have limitations in what we can do at the federal level as far as our statute and regulations, but it is very much, we are referring to COSIN's report, we're referring to K-12-6's weekly newsletters to say, this is what's happening this week in K-12 schools. So we're talking about it, and I know that it needs more than that. We're actively working on it, and we will be putting together a work plan that we're presenting to the P12 Policy Committee next month, and we're actively drafting that right now.
Great. Well, so as I mentioned earlier, the toughest part of my job this afternoon would be end this conversation, which I'm doing it now, but hopefully we can have a round of applause for our panelists.
Hey, everybody. Well, first, please join me again in thanking Kevin and our awesome panel for this discussion. I'm also getting over something, so I'm keeping my mask on. I'm Philip Lovell. I am the Associate Executive Director for All for Ed, and I'm pleased to be the President of NCTET, which really means that I am the assistant to John Bernstein. But thank you all very much for being here and for this insightful panel. There are so many insights. One thing that really just rang true to me was the words from our superintendent, who says that those with the most privilege need to have the loudest voice. And I think we are all privileged to be in this room together. We are all privileged to be in Washington. We are all privileged to be just feet away from the White House, from the Congress. And really, I feel like that's our call to action, that we must use our privilege to speak with, for, and empower those who would lack that privilege, but also to ensure that we're using our voice to execute on the vision that we've all discussed here today, to support Chairwoman Rosenworcel in her effort to expand the E-rate funding for the school buses, and hopefully a whole lot more as well, as ECF is on its way to being depleted, which it well should be, but it means that we need to do a whole lot more together to make sure that we're providing those internet connections.
That's it. You're dismissed. See you all tomorrow night.